Good afternoon, everyone. Guys, I'm going to be talking about Georgia. I'm going to be talking about Syria. I'm also going to be talking about the United Kingdom and what's happening in Ukraine. So before we go, guys, can we just hit those like buttons and the subscribe buttons below? Because it really helps me out when you guys do that. So where do we start then, guys? I'm going to start. I want to keep the focus on this video, on what's happening in Georgia and what's happening in Syria, and let you guys know how this fits into global conflict of an industrial scale, how this fits into the Ukrainian conflict, and how this fits into the global, what do I call it? The global workings as it is. But before we go on to that, guys, I want to share with you a video I found online. Now, I'm sure some of you I'm sure a lot of you have seen this, but let me just share this video with you. Now, those of you who've been following the channel for a while, I always say, how many times have I said about the real decisions, the real work is done behind closed doors. And then when you see these politicians having these like fake meetings and shaking hands, how many times have I said that before? So I just want to share this video with you guys. Right, hang on, let me bring this back to the beginning. Let me make that big. Right. I'll play this video, guys. I'll stop it at various points for commentary.
The person in the, so if you think of two roles, right? The Foreign Secretary in Great Britain and the private secretary in the PM's office responsible for foreign affairs and official.
So for those of you, quickly, guys, before we get into this, for those of you guys who don't know, this guy's called Dominic Cummings. Now, he's somebody I kept an eye on for a long time because he, to me, seems like the mastermind behind a lot of political structuring. He knows the game.
Whose name has never been in the newspapers. That person.
Sorry, what he said there, guys, is, they're behind the scenes. There's peoples whose names have never been in the newspaper. In fact, let me just rewind, go back a minute, because that is important.
Office responsible for foreign affairs, an official whose name has never been in the newspapers. That person was like 10 times more powerful and important than the Secretary of State was. And I think this is something which people just don't really realize. And it's part of like how the whole system has become fake. So you have fake meritocracy, fake responsibility, and then fake cabinet government. So they all walk up Downing Street, the cameras whir, they pose, they smile, ha, I'm going into the most powerful meeting, aren't I great? But it's all nonsense. The cabinet is just a kind of stage theatre. And actually officials in the cabinet office have already decided it all.
So, guys, like, everything is fake. Now, what he's just said there is that there are people behind the scenes whose names have never been in the paper. Nobody knows who they are, and these are the people that are making the real decisions. Now, of course, this happens behind the scenes, and then they tell the politicians what they've got to be told to, what they're told to say. Now, I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I'm certainly not saying it's a good thing. I'm saying this is the way it works. Now, when we've got people like Keir Starmer, David Lammy, Jess Phillips, Angela Rayner, when we've got these people as our elected officials, you've got to say, is this really a bad thing? But, I'm not saying whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. What I'm saying is it's fake. Everything that we see on the TV, all these politicians coming out there, Keir Starmer acting tough, David Lammy acting tough, somebody opposing them, it's all fake. Now, we can go down that rabbit hole of who makes those decisions and who's forcing them and who pays them. But let's just continue with this, guys.
When you sit in Whitehall now, right, in meetings, they are literally scripted. So when the Prime Minister has a meeting with ministers, what happens is that before the Prime Minister has that meeting, officials go into the Prime Minister's study and they give him a folder. And in the folder at the front is a thing called Chairman's Notes. And that's the script. And that's what the Prime Minister reads out. And the conclusions for the meeting are in the Chairman's Notes, drafted before the meeting happens, right? So the Prime Minister says, hello.
So do you understand that, guys? Before these meetings even happen, the agenda, the outcome, and the conclusion, it's already out. It's already predetermined. So when these politicians go in there and sit down there and give their best stern faces, they're not making any decisions themselves. They're literally reading off a script. If, of course, what we are to believe, if of course we are to believe Dominic Cummings, which I certainly do.
Secretary of State, blah, blah, blah. And then all these officials sit around the sides on chairs around the edge of the room, and then the MP, the Secretaries of State, all look down at their folders because they've all got their scripts, right? And this is why I use the NPC meme, right? Because then the Prime Minister reads out, well, we're here to discuss blah, blah, blah. And then he goes around the room, and then Secretary of State for Justice or the Foreign Secretary reads out his bullet points, and then he reads out their bullet points, and they read out. If anyone goes on script, you see the officials sort of go, and then look over at the other official inside the room and kind of go, that means we'll come back to that after the meeting and make sure that doesn't happen. And then at the end, it was a fascinating, great discussion. Thank you so much for your wonderful, insightful, original contributions. And then he reads out the conclusions, which are all drafted in advance. And it sounds like a parody, but it is literally how the British state functions. And the MPs are happy with that, right? Well, how does the psychology of it work? The officials are happy because they have almost all the real power. The cabinet secretary is now 100 times more powerful than any cabinet minister apart from the PM. And the MPs are happy because this whole system pretends that they're in charge. So both sides are basically happy with the fake version of the government.
So you see from that, guys, what we can get from that is it's a fake system. Everything's fake. When you go to vote, it doesn't matter because it doesn't matter who you vote for, because if they're reading off a script and we have no say about who is writing that script, doesn't matter. So whether it's Conservatives, whether it's, Reform, whether it's Labour, doesn't matter, and I'm saying this as someone who I stood as a candidate for Reform. I resigned once I saw how the structure was set up. I looked at this structure, guys, and I said, I don't want to be part of this structure. And now you're seeing other people like Ben Habib come out and point to the same things that I did. Now, the reason I'm telling you guys this, and the reason I've brought this to the forefront of everybody's, for this video, when we go on and talk about Georgia and Syria, everything's scripted. So all these political moves and all these political statements and everything moving forward, it's already scripted. Now, I would suspect heavily that the people who are scripting this in the United Kingdom are speaking to the people who are scripting it in the United States, who are scripting that in Russia. And I would suspect if you follow these scripters, do you know what, guys? I think that's a good word to use, the scripters, the script writers. If you follow these script writers back far enough, I would suspect that all these guys are connected. But you see how and he briefly touched on it there, the psychology of this, where the politicians are really happy with that because, the politicians can literally just not do anything all week, go get drunk, go to parties, have cocktails, do whatever they want, turn up in the morning, sit there, look interested and read off a script. That's their job, easily accomplished. It's done. All I need to do is read off script and then I'm going home for the weekend. So can you see how everybody benefits here? It's the whole thing's an illusion, guys. Okay. Now I want you to remember that. I want you to remember the illusion of democracy. Remember the illusion of this sort of thing that we have, like where we can choose our leaders. Yes, of course, we can choose the perceived leaders, but who's telling those guys what to say? Do we get a say on the scripters? Probably not. In fact, I'm going to say we don't get a say on them. And as Dominic Cummings said in that video, there's guys who've been there, for the last 10 years, and their names are never published in the paper, and they're the person who's dictating all these meetings. So anyway, guys, let's go. What we're going to do first, Syria, or in fact, let's go to the Ukraine. Yes, if I've not, well, guys, we'll do the Ukraine map after this because it's. Let's talk about Georgia first. So Georgia's all over the news at the moment. There's pro EU. It kind of sounds like what happened in Ukraine all over again. But where do we start with Georgia? Let's go. Okay, so in 2000 and I think it was 2009, the Russian, and I'm keeping this real short, guys, okay? That if I wasn't, it was 2008. It was 2008. There was a district in Georgia who wanted, I'm keeping this really short, guys, okay? Basically, a district in Georgia that claimed it wanted autonomy. The Russians came in, there was a big war, it settled down, and then, you know, and now, you know, we're starting to see things build back up again. Now, the reason I wanted to mention 2008, because this is known as the, you know, it's commonly known as the Russian invasion of Georgia. Now, this was pretty much how the Russians thought that the annexation, that the invasion, the 2022 invasion of Ukraine would have gone. It didn't. It was a catastrophe. But that's kind of what they've, you know, what they've been using as their blueprint. And this is how we know that the Russians do this. Now, I've given many examples about how if there was a Finnish border town and the Russians decided to annex a Finnish border town because there were separatists and those separatists wanted to become Russian, and then there was a vote, it would be very difficult for anything to happen, you know, on a global spectrum. But the reason I'm saying this, guys, because the troubles in Georgia started in 2008, and a lot of people are saying, if the West would have shown strength in 2008 with Georgia, then we wouldn't be in the situation we are now. However, unfortunately, we are. So let me just go real quick to the share screen, guys, and let me share from some mainstream. I'll give commentary. So Georgia protests enter the fourth night as opposition grows to freeze on EU talks. So Georgia wanted to move closer to the European Union, as Ukraine did in 2013, and now we've got protests. This to me now looks like a Maidan Revolution 2.0. So what I would speculate is happening behind the scenes right now. I would say you've got pro-Russian agent provocateurs in the crowd, operating behind the scenes, maybe Russian special forces who are there on the streets trying to develop that situation one way. I would say you also have pro-Western agents on the streets trying to develop this situation to another way. But when you look at all these situations, when you look at any global conflict, when you look at anything that's happening in the world, to understand why this is happening, look who benefits. And if you can't find who benefits, look who doesn't benefit. Well, certainly in Georgia, having these sort of protests on the streets in Georgia, where you've got Georgians wanting to be part of the European Union, when you've got these sort of protests, the only person that this hurts is the Russians. So if it's hurting the Russians, who do we think is most likely behind it? Now, guys, you know, we're entering a new phase of warfare now where we can influence people by social media. I can, for example, if I controlled your Facebook feed, you know, the feed that whatever you see, or your Twitter or what your X, whatever you call it, if I was to control your feed and only showed you things that were made to, you know, invoke a certain reaction, of course you can influence people. And all this sort of stuff can be done from overseas input. Now, I don't know this information, but I'd like to see what percentage of Georgians use Facebook as opposed to VKNet. Now, that would pretty much in an instant show you what's happening on the ground. For those of you who don't know, VKNet, I think that's what it's called, VK.net, is basically it's a Russian social media site. The Russians, the Eastern Europeans, used to use it more than Facebook. After the Maidan Revolution and the Ukrainians started to become more westernized, more Ukrainians now use Facebook. Excuse me. Now, that is kind of where it's at, because whoever owns these two media platforms, they control what people are seeing. So if they want to let people see, I don't know, cute pictures of cats, guess what? A couple of clicks on a screen in some office somewhere, and everybody is seeing cute pictures of cats. Likewise, if people in Georgia, if somebody wants to show people in Georgia anti-Russian propaganda, they'll see anti-Russian propaganda. Likewise, on VKNet, if people want to see anti-Western propaganda, guess what? They're gonna see anti-Western propaganda. So the situation as it is, it's leading towards instability for the Russian military out there, which is obviously not a good thing for Putin, because it's looking like he's having to fight more battles now on more fronts. Now, this is how the start of a world war happens, guys. It really is. This is what we see at the build-up to a world war. We see all these other areas flaring up. Remember, the main area here, guys, is Ukraine, and I will come on to the shared map in a minute. Guys, I'm trying to keep these videos to about 20 minutes, but I'm just conscious I've got to do, I'm going to do Syria now as well, so I may be slightly over 20 minutes. And if you want a deeper dive into Georgia, guys, and the things that are happening on the ground at the moment, you know, they're pushed towards the EU. Why or why not this is happening? The Russians, if you want to know about what happened in 2008, God, I mean, I can remember when this happened. That makes me feel really old. So what's happening in Syria then, guys? So for those of you who don't know, the Assad regime, or the Syrian government, or the democratically elected government of Syria, whatever you want to call it. Where do we go? Okay, let's just go what's happening at the moment. So we've got a rebel group opening up in Syria. Now, this rebel group is trying to take on the Syrian government. Now, the Syrian government is backed by, is backed by the Russians. Now, again, you know, when we talk about these events, look who gains to benefit and who is there at a loss. Well, right now, the Russians are at a loss. Remember, there's all sorts of stuff happening here behind the scenes. You know, there's all sorts of stuff, and these alliances are being drawn. So now you've got Syria, you've got Syria, you've got China, you've got Iran, you've got Russia, all there in that type of that group of alliances. So when we're talking about Russians now having to prop up Assad, Russian military aircraft using airstrikes on these rebel forces. Remember, those aircraft that are flying missions over Syria, that's aircraft that could be flying missions over Ukraine. So the Ukrainians gain to benefit. The West gain to benefit from these conflicts. Now, again, you know, I've done videos about this before, but that's why when the United Kingdom is involved in Ukraine, that's when the Falkland Islands is going to flare up, because the United Kingdom would then have to fight a conflict on two fronts, and it's a lot more difficult fighting a conflict on two fronts. So what's happening in Syria? There's there's groups of, you know, what do we call them? Islamic fundamentalists trying to overthrow the Syrian government. The Syrian government propped up by the Russians. Now, guys, again, when we're talking about these Islamic fundamentalist groups, does it not seem a little bit coincidental that all these things just seem to happen at the same time? So if you look at who is there to, so this is negative on the Russians. So who's it most likely to have funded this? Who's most likely to have instigated this, to have influenced this? You know, obviously I've got no evidence pointing either way, but, you know, in all these situations, look if you can find out who's benefiting, fine. If you can find out who's not benefiting and who is detrimental to, then who are their enemies, then you can kind of understand where this influence is coming from. So that's kind of the situation in Syria at the moment. I am trying to keep this short, guys, as well. Also, something else from the, where are we, guys? I'm totally lost here. Yeah. So where is it? I think, hang on, let me get this up, guys. I'm totally, yeah. There's been a situation in Kosovo where there's been, well, let's read it, guys, because it's one of the things I keep talking about, the water supply. The water supply everywhere, really, but especially if you live in the United Kingdom, the water supply is ridiculously vulnerable. Accusations fly after blast hits key Kosovo water system. A detonation on a critical aqueduct comes after a series of smaller incidents in the tense Serb majority north of the country. So I'm going to put all these links in the description, guys, but what you can see now is the water supply. Your water supply is a weapon. And if you live in the United Kingdom, our water supply is ridiculously vulnerable, guys. It really is. The water supply is so vulnerable, and all it's going to take is a few key strikes. They don't have to be things that go kaboom. It can be people with crowbars, sledgehammers, still saws, things that, guess what? They're readily available in the United Kingdom. These sort of things can bring our water system to an absolute standstill. There won't be a drop in the taps. That's on top of an already broken water system. So, guys, the jokes of this video, I wanted to give you guys just, kind of a feather touch on what's happening in Georgia, the Georgia conflict. No, it's not a conflict. The Georgia, what's happening in Georgia, how what's happening today kind of started in 2008, although you can push that further back. It started because there were pro-EU talks that got crushed, which is kind of what happened in Ukraine in 2013. The situation in Syria, we've got Islamic rebel forces, whatever you want to call them, guys, because I struggle to find a name for all these different groups. Is it ISIS? Is it ISIS-K? Is it, who is it? Like, who really are these all different groups, or is it the same people wearing different T-shirts? And when you look at all these things that are happening in the world, think, right, okay, who is this detrimental to? Okay, this is both of these incidences in Georgia and Russia are detrimental to the Russians. So who's most likely behind it? And I'll let you guys make that assumption yourselves. So let's quickly, guys, just go on to the Ukraine map. Let me get it up here. Where are we? Because the situation is not going anywhere in Ukraine. Ukraine is the main focus. And like I always say, by Christmas time, it will have gone back. In fact, let's go back. Let's just go back to, let's go back to the beginning of the month. Where is our area of focus here? This is our area of focus here, guys, because this area, Pokrovs, once Pokrovs falls, that is pretty much it, guys. We're just going to go back 2 weeks from now. Remember what I said, with the Russians will be pushing up this river, and then when they get to this point here, I would suspect they're going to go north. Wow. Yeah, they're taking a lot of ground. Now, the reason, again, guys, I keep saying this, the reason they're holding off at around 10 kilometers is because that is well within range of their 120 millimeter, what we got, 8.6 kilometers. Remember, the ground dictates their movements, and they're using this stream, whatever this river, as a defensive line. That's why they're doing that, guys. Okay, so they're going to come west, and then they're going to go north. Guys, that is it for today. I think I've hit all the points. Again, the jokes of this video, guys, was just like a little uptick on what's happening in Georgia, what's happening in the Middle East. Remember, the focus is going to switch back to the Middle East round about Christmas time. It's just going to happen that way. Baby Jesus, the Nativity, Jerusalem, all that sort of stuff is in the Middle East. So people's focus will go back there. I wanted to show you that video at the beginning, guys, just so you guys know that everything is fake. Now, who's deciding these things? Who's writing these scripts? Who do they report to? Who's dictating their movements? Who influences them? We don't know. I certainly don't know, because I don't know who these people are. But anyway, guys, I'm going to max a grid, and I'll get you guys another video later.